It is also indicative that the Mexican cartels continue to traffic significant quantities of fentanyl to Colorado, and the seizure has been tied to active DEA investigations involving federal, state, and local partners.
6:17 a.m., Minneapolis, Minnesota. The wind chill had dropped to -14 degrees. Steam rose from the manholes along Franklin Avenue like the breath of something buried and restless beneath the city. 3 black Chevrolet Suburbans sat motionless on the corner of Cedar Avenue, their engines running silent, their windows tinted dark enough to swallow the streetlights. Inside those vehicles sat 23 federal agents representing the FBI, ICE, and the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General. They had been planning this moment for 19 months. They had traced shell companies across 4 continents. They had followed digital breadcrumbs through encrypted servers in Dubai, Nairobi, and Guadalajara. And now, in the frozen pre-dawn silence of a Minneapolis neighborhood, they were about to pull the thread that would unravel a $5 billion empire built on stolen futures and cartel logistics. The target was a 3-story building on the 2400 block of Riverside Avenue. State records identified it as the Horizon Bright Child Development Center, a licensed daycare facility serving low-income families. According to the enrollment database maintained by the Minnesota Department of Human Services, this single facility cared for 347 children daily. Federal and state subsidies had deposited more than $62 million into its accounts over the previous fiscal year. But when agents approached the entrance and breached the front door at 6:23 a.m., they found no children. They found no parents. They found no life. The lobby was pristine. Plastic chairs were arranged in perfect rows. A television mounted on the wall displayed a frozen frame of an educational cartoon, paused mid-scene. The reception desk held a stack of intake forms, each one filled out with careful handwriting, each one documenting a child who had never existed. The lead agent, a 14-year veteran of the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, walked through the facility in silence. He opened classroom doors one by one. Cribs stood empty with mattresses still wrapped in factory plastic. Toy bins overflowed with items that had never been touched. A chalkboard in the preschool room displayed the alphabet in colorful letters, but the chalk itself had never been used. The dust on the ledge was undisturbed. In the back office, investigators found the nerve center of the deception. Filing cabinets contained dossiers on more than 900 children, complete with social security numbers, birth certificates, immunization records, and parent signatures. Every document was fabricated. The social security numbers had been purchased from identity brokers operating on dark web marketplaces. The birth certificates had been manufactured using templates stolen from county clerk offices in 3 different states. The signatures had been generated by a machine learning algorithm trained to replicate human handwriting with statistical variation. This was not amateur fraud. This was industrial-scale identity synthesis. But the real discovery waited inside a reinforced closet behind the director's desk. When forensic technicians cut through the steel door, they found $47 million in cash bundled in vacuum-sealed bags. Sitting on top of the money were 3 encrypted satellite phones and a leather-bound ledger written entirely in code. The final item in the closet was a photograph, a single image showing the facility's director standing beside a man whose face triggered immediate recognition in the federal database. That man was Rodrigo Mendez Valencia, a senior logistics coordinator for the CJNG cartel, one of the most violent and sophisticated drug trafficking organizations in the Western Hemisphere. At that moment, the FBI understood what they were dealing with. This was not welfare fraud. This was not a local scheme exploiting bureaucratic inefficiency. This was a money laundering terminal embedded in the American social safety net, funded by taxpayer dollars and operated for the benefit of a transnational criminal empire. If you believe that stealing money meant for vulnerable children to fund cartel operations is a crime that demands accountability, tap the like button and comment justice below. The director of the Horizon Bright Child Development Center was a 51-year-old woman named Halima Osman Warfa. According to state licensing records, she had operated child care facilities in Minneapolis for more than 12 years. She served on the board of 3 community nonprofits. She had been photographed with state legislators at ribbon-cutting ceremonies. She had received a commendation from the mayor's office for her contributions to early childhood education. None of it was real. Halima Osman Warfa was a fabricated identity, constructed 7 years earlier using documents purchased from a forger in Nairobi. The woman behind the name had entered the United States on a tourist visa in 2016 and never left. She had no formal education. She had no background in child development. What she had was a relationship with people who understood how to exploit the gaps in American oversight, and a direct line to the CJNG cartel's financial apparatus. By 9:45 a.m., federal analysts had begun tracing the money flows connected to the Horizon Bright network. What they discovered was a financial labyrinth spanning 41 countries. funds deposited into the daycare's accounts were immediately transferred to a series of shell companies registered in Delaware, Wyoming, and Nevada, states with minimal corporate transparency requirements. From there, the money moved to intermediary accounts in the Cayman Islands, the United Arab Emirates, and Kenya. The final destination was a network of accounts controlled by CJ&G-affiliated entities in Jalisco, Mexico. The operation had a name. Buried in the encrypted files recovered from the facility's servers, analysts found references to something called Project Lighthouse. The name was darkly ironic. This network had been designed to guide billions of dollars through the darkness, away from legitimate recipients and into the hands of cartel leadership. The scale was staggering. Between 2020 and 2025, Project Lighthouse had processed more than $5 billion in fraudulent child care subsidies across a network of 67 facilities in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Ohio, and Arizona. The money had funded cartel operations across North America and beyond. It had purchased precursor chemicals for fentanyl production in Sinaloa. It had bribed port officials in Long Beach and Houston. It had financed the construction of drug tunnels beneath the Arizona border. And at the center of it all, investigators found a name that changed everything. The encrypted authorization protocols embedded in Project Lighthouse's financial architecture required approval from a single individual for any transfer exceeding $5 million. That individual was identified in the system only by a code name, Director North. When analysts cross-referenced the digital signature associated with Director North against federal databases, they found a match. The signature belonged to a laptop registered to the Minnesota Commissioner of Children and Families, a political appointee named Gerald Thorson. Gerald Thorson had served in state government for 22 years. He had overseen the expansion of Minnesota's child care subsidy program from $300 million annually to more than $2 billion. He had championed accessibility reforms that reduced verification requirements in the name of helping working families. He had personally signed off on the licensing applications for 31 of the facilities now identified as fraudulent. And according to the encrypted records, he had received more than $18 million in payments routed through a trust fund registered in his wife's maiden name. This was not negligence. This was not bureaucratic failure. This was command-level collusion between a senior state official and a transnational drug cartel. Gerald Thorson had transformed Minnesota's child care system into a money laundering operation. He had weaponized compassion. He had turned the social safety net into a cartel ATM. If you're still watching and you understand the gravity of what's being revealed, stay with me. What comes next is worse. At 2:14 a.m. the following morning, a federal command center activated in downtown Minneapolis. The facility was a repurposed warehouse that had been converted into a joint operations hub for FBI, ICE, DEA, and DHS investigators. On the main wall hung a digital map of the upper Midwest. Red markers pulsed across the screen, each one representing a confirmed node in the Project Lighthouse network. There were 67 facilities in total, spread across 4 states. 34 were in Minnesota, 18 were in Wisconsin, 10 were in Ohio, 5 were in Arizona. The scope of the corruption was unprecedented. This was not a local problem. This was a regional infrastructure project designed to siphon billions from the American taxpayer. At 4:30 a.m., the operation began. More than 800 federal agents mobilized simultaneously across all 4 states. In Minneapolis alone, 22 SWAT teams breached facilities within a 90-minute window. Black Hawk helicopters provided aerial support and surveillance. Armored vehicles blocked escape routes. ICE agents coordinated with state police to establish checkpoints on major highways. The cartel had built a fortress inside America's welfare system, and now the federal government was tearing it down brick by brick. The raids yielded immediate results. At a facility in St. Paul, agents discovered a basement converted into a currency counting operation. 14 workers sat at long tables, sorting and banding cash that arrived in duffel bags from across the region. The total recovered from that single location exceeded $23 million. In Milwaukee, investigators breached a facility that state records showed as caring for 400 children. The building was empty except for a server room containing encrypted hard drives and satellite communication equipment. The servers were linked to financial networks spanning 3 continents. In Columbus, agents found a facility operating as a front for human trafficking. 16 individuals were discovered in a hidden room behind a false wall, including 4 minors. They had been transported from Central America through cartel-controlled routes and were being held for labor exploitation. But the most significant discovery came from a property outside Rochester, Minnesota. State records showed the address as an agricultural supply warehouse with no connection to child care. But utility records told a different story. The facility consumed more electricity than a small hospital. Water usage exceeded 100,000 gallons per week. When tactical teams breached the building at 5:47 a.m., they found a fully operational drug manufacturing facility. The production floor spanned 3 levels. Conveyor belts moved product through automated packaging systems. Chemical vats produced fentanyl precursors at industrial scale. The facility was producing an estimated 40 tons of fentanyl per month, enough to kill every person in North America several times over. The funding for this operation came directly from Project Lighthouse. The stolen child care subsidies had been laundered through shell companies and used to purchase precursor chemicals, manufacturing equipment, and the silence of everyone who might have asked questions. The cartel had built a closed loop: steal from the government, wash the money, produce the drugs, destroy the communities, and use the chaos to steal more. It was elegant in its brutality. It was industrial in its scope. By noon, the scale of the arrests became clear. More than 300 individuals had been taken into federal custody across the four-state region. Among them were facility directors, accountants, identity forgers, cartel logistics coordinators, and corrupt public officials. Gerald Thorson was arrested at his lakeside cabin in northern Minnesota. He offered no resistance. He simply asked if he could finish his coffee before being handcuffed. Investigators later found that he had been preparing to flee the country. His passport was in his jacket pocket. A one-way ticket to Morocco sat on his kitchen counter. But the corruption extended far beyond a single commissioner. As investigators examined the seized servers and financial records, they discovered that Project Lighthouse had compromised dozens of individuals within Minnesota's state government. 14 employees of the Department of Human Services had received payments for expediting license approvals. 6 county inspectors had accepted bribes to overlook obvious signs of fraud during facility visits. 3 state legislators had received campaign contributions from shell companies linked to the network. The cartel had not just exploited the system, it had infiltrated it. It had turned bureaucrats into accomplices and regulators into enablers. One veteran fraud investigator with the Inspector General's office sat in the command center and stared at the network diagram displayed on the wall. He had spent 18 years tracking welfare fraud. He had seen schemes large and small, but nothing had prepared him for this. He turned to his supervisor and said something that would later appear in the official report. He said that this was not corruption, it was colonization. The cartel had colonized American social services and turned them into revenue streams for drug trafficking. The investigation into law enforcement complicity began within hours of the initial raids. Federal analysts examined patrol records, communication logs, and internal emails from agencies across the region. What they found was systematic compromise. 17 officers from the Minneapolis Police Department had received payments from accounts linked to Project Lighthouse. The payments were disguised as consulting fees for security assessments that never occurred. In exchange, these officers had provided advance warning of compliance inspections. They had altered patrol routes to avoid facilities during critical transfer periods. They had leaked information about ongoing investigations.
The route extended to federal agencies as 3 IC officers stationed in Minnesota had been receiving payments for more than 4 years. Their role was simple but devastating. They identified individuals within immigrant communities who could be coerced into participating in the fraud scheme. They used their authority to threaten deportation against anyone who refused to cooperate. They transformed immigration enforcement into a recruitment tool for the cartel. One honest agent, a woman who had served with ICE for 11 years, broke down during her interview with internal affairs investigators. She had suspected something was wrong for years. She had filed reports about irregularities in her colleagues' behavior. Those reports had been buried. She had been transferred to administrative duties. She had been told that her concerns were unfounded. Now she understood that the people burying her reports were themselves on the payroll. She said that she had joined the agency to protect the country, and instead she had watched it be sold piece by piece. At 6 p.m., the Justice Department convened an emergency briefing for congressional leadership. The confirmed financial loss to American taxpayers stood at $5.3 billion. That figure represented child care subsidies that had been stolen from families who needed them. It represented drug prevention programs that had been defunded because the money had been diverted. It represented the future of children who had been abandoned by a system designed to protect them. But the human cost could not be measured in dollars. Investigators estimated that the fentanyl produced by the Rochester facility had been responsible for more than 14,000 overdose deaths across the Midwest over the previous 3 years. Each of those deaths had a name. Each had a family. Each had been someone's child, parent, or friend. The stolen money had been converted into poison and distributed through communities that were already struggling. The cartel had used America's compassion to fund America's destruction. The investigation revealed one final layer of the conspiracy that transformed the case from regional corruption into a national security emergency. Among the files recovered from Gerald Thorson's personal devices, analysts discovered communications with individuals operating in East Africa and the Middle East. The money flowing through Project Lighthouse had not been used exclusively for drug production. A portion of the funds, an estimated $700 million, had been diverted to organizations with suspected ties to extremist networks operating in Somalia. The daycare fraud had become a terrorism financing pipeline. American taxpayer dollars intended to help children had been laundered through cartel networks and delivered to groups that wished harm upon the United States. The system had been turned inside out. The safety net had become a weapon pointed at the people it was meant to protect. At 11 p.m., federal prosecutors announced that charges would be filed against 217 individuals. The charges range from wire fraud and money laundering to drug trafficking, human trafficking, and material support for terrorism. Gerald Thorson faced a potential sentence of life in prison without parole. Halima Osman Warfa remained at large, believed to have fled the country through a network of cartel-controlled transit points. An international arrest warrant had been issued through Interpol. The facilities are closed now. The servers have been seized. The money has been frozen in accounts across 12 countries. But the damage cannot be undone. The children who lost access to legitimate childcare because funds were diverted to fraud cannot get those years back. The families destroyed by fentanyl cannot be made whole. The trust that communities placed in institutions designed to help them has been shattered. This case forces a reckoning with the vulnerabilities embedded in American social programs. For decades, the priority has been accessibility, getting money to people quickly and with minimal barriers. That compassion was weaponized. The cartel understood that bureaucracies are afraid to ask hard questions. They understood that efficiency often means reduced verification. They understood that political correctness could be exploited to avoid scrutiny. They built an empire on those weaknesses. The investigation into Project Lighthouse proved that the most dangerous threats do not always announce themselves. Sometimes they arrive wearing the clothing of community leaders. Sometimes they fill out paperwork and attend ribbon-cutting ceremonies and collect commendations from mayors. Sometimes they smile at the camera while stealing the future from beneath our feet. The factory in Rochester has been demolished. The network has been dismantled. But the question echoes across every state in America. How many other facilities are operating, collecting millions while children go without? How many other systems have been colonized by organizations that wish U.S. harm? How many other Gerald Thorsons are sitting in state offices, signing approvals and collecting payments? This story is a warning. Power does not always require violence. Sometimes it only requires patience. Sometimes it only requires finding the gaps in systems built on trust and exploiting them until there is nothing left. The cartel did not need to invade America. They simply needed to fill out the right forms. If you believe we need a complete audit of every social program in America, if you believe that accountability must reach every level of government, comment exposed below. Share this story so that others understand what was found beneath the surface of a Minneapolis daycare. Stay vigilant, stay informed. The threat is not always visible, and the enemy does not always wear uniform. Remember, this story was a fictional dramatization inspired by real concerns about fraud and corruption. It was created for storytelling and awareness purposes. But the questions it raises are real, and the vulnerabilities it describes exist in systems across the country. The only defense against exploitation is vigilance, and vigilance requires that we keep watching and keep demanding answers.